Good evening, students of GBC. This is now week 11, and this is part 3 of the section we are doing on digital identity. Yes, so before we begin, I am going to upload several articles and helpful guidelines to you related to both digital identity, today's lecture, digital rhetoric, and what we're going to talk about next week, which is making a pitching an idea. And it's going to sort of tie together all of the things that we've been talking about this entire semester so far, including how to write, which platforms you use, all the different things that we've discussed from the very beginning. And the assignments, the stuff about misinformation and disinformation, all these things are going to start to tie together, especially in this lecture, but from now on, because as I mentioned, I am going to ask you to do a presentation. Now, there was some feedback given recently, last week, and one of the things that students are looking for here is a little bit more of a challenge. But the individual who made that comment sort of rescinded on that request. But you should be careful what you wish for, because it is going to get a lot more difficult from now on. So I hope everybody's paying attention, because this stuff is more in depth and it's more theoretical, and there's more reading involved. We don't have a textbook, so this course has had very light reading so far. But I'm going to basically take sections of textbooks and give them to you through the website for you to look at. Most of these things are PDFs. I hope I'm not infringing on copyrights, but there's only 8 of you, so let's just manage that through the website, and this will supplement the things that I say in the video lecture. So please make sure that you follow the video lecture and check for information on the website. I know this video lecture is one day late, but I had, again, there's just so many things going on. I couldn't get it done yesterday. Somehow I picked up a cold, so if I'm sniffling a little bit, it's not because I was in Itaewon, it's because I just got a cold from being in quarantine too long. Now, like I said, this lecture brings us to the point where it's sort of a culmination of all the things that we've talked about so far, like the speeches, the hot and cold mediums, different platforms, visual media, and the new media that we talked about so far this semester. This is called digital rhetoric because rhetoric means persuasion. Rhetoric is the way that you get somebody to agree with you, right? And in particular, this is the way I've chosen to structure the courses: how to analyze communication and how to make the best, how to improve your communication skills. Since this is a senior course and many of you are going to be going into job interviews and preparing skills where communication with people in all sorts of different situations, personal communication and global communication with people from other countries and other regions and different languages, using different types of communication devices and technology. It's very complex. And since we can't do much of the interpersonal stuff, which was a large part of this course, and it got yanked out almost completely in March because I had to change a lot of what I planned to do. Some of this stuff has developed as we went, and so the digital rhetoric part has become essential to the content of this class. So it's completely gotten away from any sort of interaction that we could have done together, except for that one Zoom meeting. Now, my kids are still not in school, so I'm planning on doing one more Zoom meeting with you, but I'll announce that probably next week. I'm hoping they're going to be back to school, but again, that new cluster in Seoul, and you may have heard, unfortunately, there was a Chungnam student who's, so I've heard, I shouldn't spread rumors, but a 20-year-old female got tested positive in Daejeon. So, I mean, we just have to wait for the news to arrive before we can make decisions. So it's very hard for me to do a Zoom meeting when my kids are at home. I did it last time, but I can't do a full lecture like that. It's just not possible. So I'll let you know. I hope we can do another Zoom meeting like that and we can get the whole group together. Now, anyway, this idea of rhetoric is very old. It goes way back in Western culture to Aristotle, which Koreans call, probably the pronunciation is more correct, Aristoteles. And you might know, if you have your native languages, another one, you might say it's something like that. The American pronunciation is Aristotle. So he wrote something called rhetoric because the ancient Greeks were very interested in this thing called the art of persuasion, how to use words to make other people do things. You probably all know Socrates or Socrates, and Platon, who is also, we call Plato. These are some of the most famous philosophers, but there were hundreds of these people. And they belonged to different schools of thought, and they basically trained themselves in order to be effective at manipulating people through language. This was one of the main parts of an education for a Greek person. It still has continued to this day to be essential to how Western culture works, and now because of the globalization of the world, that everybody's invested in the same sort of thing, how they can persuade people to do things. So as everything has moved online, we have now come up with this sort of hybrid term, which is called digital rhetoric. Now, the interesting thing about digital rhetoric is the rhetoric means in Greek speaker, and digital comes from the word digitas in Latin, which means digit, finger. And originally, digital was just numbers that you could count on your fingers, numbers below 10. But in the 20th century, we started using this term for numerical term for counting on your fingers as more of a calculation that a computer could do, rather than from 1938 onward, that a computer could do rather than using analog. So in the 1960s, if you're following the timeline here, in the 1960s we started using that to describe broadcasting, right? And we haven't talked a whole lot about television and radio because we have the internet and we have YouTube and we have Snapchat and everything else. So I focused on those things because that's what you're interested in. But there has been a progression of technologies that have evolved into this environment which we call digital, okay? And it did evolve from the concept of just counting on your fingers, which is fascinating to me because my son's learning how to do math and he's counting on his fingers. And it is a very elementary process, but he's simultaneously becoming involved in the digital world at the same time. So what happens when you become involved in the digital world? Well, when you're a child, you don't realize how different the digital world is, that you are they're not aware of the fact that, like I am, that there could potentially be more than just me watching this video. When a young person who's too young to realize records themselves, they just look like, oh, they're watching it, and the mom and dad is also watching it, but they don't realize if you put it on the internet that millions of people could watch it. And this is the scary thing about recording yourself and putting yourself on YouTube, which caused me to be so nervous in my early lectures, is just the thought that if I make a mistake, hundreds of people are going to see it. It's not going to be erased, I'm going to be exposed, right? So that's a confidence thing, but that's also an awareness thing. And so when you want to be effective rhetorically, you have to be conscious of all the things that you can do. Obviously, one of the things is whatever you do, you want to be you want perfection. You want to be perfect, but that's unrealistic. So what you really need to do is just prepare and plan and analyze and understand how you can put together something that will be persuasive, right? So the first thing that I read over some textbooks, like I said, and I'm going to share some of the excerpts with you. I don't think you want to read 250 pages of a book called Digital Rhetoric, Method, Practice, and Process, or something like that. That's probably too much depth for you. But I do want to expose you to some of the academic work behind the ideas that I'm trying to present to you. So here's an excerpt from Digital Rhetoric Toward an Integrated Theory. This is by Professor Zappin, Gurek, Doheny, and Farina's work on rhetoric, community, and cyberspace in 1997. So this is early on in the development of the whole, internet space. What they suggest is that the first thing that's important or useful in analyzing the digital world is to use the traditional rhetorical strategies both in analyzing and in producing your own communication digitally. Okay? So, what does that mean? This is the main part of the lecture that I'm going to tell you today. What it means mostly is that you need to focus on the same things. You need to have a strategy, and I'm just going to introduce you to the classical ones because those are the ones I'm familiar with. As I said, this is sort of an interdisciplinary class, but if you have this background, you can understand how whether or not businessmen are conscious of the strategy that they're using, or politicians for that matter, but these ideas do have a classical basis. So, ethos. Ethos is the first of these, sometimes they call them modes of persuasion, if you want to use an English term, but I like to call them rhetorical strategies. Ethos is an appeal to authority. So you might say, if you're a person who has a high position, Donald Trump, I know I reference him more than I should, but I would say Barack Obama if he was the president. It doesn't really matter. Justin Trudeau, he's a Canadian Prime Minister. I'll use him instead. Justin Trudeau, he has this prestige when he speaks, and it's related to him because he's accomplished and he's been voted and he's popular. But there's something, it's his office, right? They talk about the status of just being the president or being the prime minister. It doesn't matter if you're, handsome or tall or old or young or an idiot or a genius. The office carries with it a certain amount of respect and authority, so that normally when somebody in that position speaks, they have command over the audience automatically. So appealing to this authority or credibility of the presenter is what ethos means. We have less ability to do that. I have more ability than you because I'm a professor. So there's a certain amount of credibility that goes along with that, which I can use to greater effect, to gain larger audiences and to keep the attention of my audiences. This might not be the best option for a student. It's certainly not the one that I relied on. But if you were a CEO, that might be what you could use in order to get more than anything else. You could just use that to get people to be persuaded, right? I've used Steve Jobs as an example before in this course, and he had that charismatic personality, to be sure, but it was also the fact that his credibility in his position, he didn't need to announce. He could just say, I'm going to make an announcement, and everybody would freak out beforehand. He didn't need to say, I'm going to release this technology. I'm going to demonstrate a smartphone. He would just say, I'm going to show you something new, and then people would show up, and people would get excited, and people would be persuaded before they even knew what the product was, right? This is the ability of ethos, excuse me. So you can demonstrate mastery by impressing people in knowing information about it, like terminology and explaining things about it, which Steve Jobs did too. But being an important figure in the field in which you're trying to persuade is the key element. Okay, so if you're a politician, then the highest position would be the president, and you would be most effective automatically. And if you were referring to the president or had the president's endorsement and you were speaking, that would be using a rhetorical strategy that relied on ethos as well. Okay, so that's that. So reputation. Use your reputation, or show that you're capable and that you deserve credibility in order to be more effective. Secondly, pathos. Pathos is probably one that you've heard before. You might have heard psychopath, or you might have heard other terms, sympathetic, pathetic. These are all related to the word pathos, which simply means emotion, right? So a psychopath is somebody who doesn't have emotion, and a sociopath is someone who doesn't understand social situations, right? And an empath is somebody who understands other people's emotions, and being sympathetic is understanding other people's feelings too. So you have the sympathetic, the pathetic, and the empathic. They're all derived from that word. Using this strategy, you can appeal to people's emotions. Some of the great speeches that we looked at earlier, that's an obvious element to some of those things. They pull at the heartstrings of, it can be a politician or it can be a protest or something like that. Martin Luther King Jr. was obviously being reasonable and logical when he was speaking, but he was also pulling at people's feelings and all the time and trying to draw them in emotionally. And that's a very effective rhetorical strategy too. So this is something to consider. You can also use fear, right? Certain types of people. I'm not going to name some of the famous ones that pop into my head, but certain politicians or military figures would use the rhetorical strategy of threatening or threatening violence or instilling fear in their audience in order to persuade them to do something, right? Even right now, certain countries are being more aggressive. Punishments might be legal, or they might be, related to like physical violence, or the police arresting you, or being deported. These are all kind of rhetorical strategies for persuading people to behave a certain way. And this would be if you're making people afraid to do something through your speech or your text or your message or whatever, digital rhetoric by sending text messages, then you're using pathos. Excuse me. And the third in the list there is logos, which is you're familiar with because that's the root word of logic. And this means that you describe facts and figures, statistics. You relate perspectives and opinions and make arguments that are connected to each other, that everybody can see the evidence of those causalities between them. And the data can be manipulated. It doesn't mean it has to be true. All you have to do is watch a political debate to see that politicians sometimes misrepresent data and confuse the constituents in the audience and the voters all the time. Some of the most skilled politicians do this all the time. They always have a statistic for everything, and it might not be relevant and it might not even be accurate. But what they're doing is trying to show that they're knowledgeable and they're reasonable and they're logical, and that's why they should be. That's how they persuade you that you think they're credible, even though they're not. That's part of the problem with this misinformation, disinformation, alternative facts line that keeps getting thrown around by especially by the Trump administration, but by many different governments, which means that they're trying to appear logical, even though they're not. And this is the Logos strategy, even though it's being twisted and manipulated. That's what it is. Okay, and finally we got. I'm not even sure how to pronounce this one because I had never heard of it before I studied this earlier this semester. I think it's Kairos. And Kairos is sort of a rhetorical strategy that relies on the time and place. So they can use certain environments to their advantage, like, I'm using a certain environment right now. I'm presenting myself with a background full of books to make myself look smart, and today I'm wearing a nicer shirt to make myself look slightly better, not very much better, but better than sloppy and or wearing an Oilers hoodie, which I don't think I did for this class, but for another one time. You could be in an amphitheater full of people who are cheering. You could have noise in the background. You could have something like a festival coinciding with what's going on. So like you choose to make your speech and everybody's already excited because they're at a festival and they're celebrating. So you choose the date and the time and the place, the environment to amplify the effect of what you say. That's essentially what Kairos is. It doesn't get mentioned as much because this is sort of automatic that, if you're a professional speaker or you're a presenter and you're trying to take advantage of everything you can to make yourself look better, then Kairos is the most obvious one. It's like you're not going to try and do a speech in the pouring rain in the middle of the forest because no one will be there. Right. So those are the 4 rhetorical strategies that you can use to help you be more effective when you're trying to communicate yourself digitally, right? So the second thing is, as we've been doing in this, I just read this book recently, so I was pleased to find out that I'd already been sort of introducing these concepts to you. First, use the rhetorical strategies in production and analysis of digital text. Secondly, identify characteristics, affordances, and constraints of new media. We've been working on that quite a bit. Third, formation of digital identities. Thank you very much. We did that on part 2. And fourth, potential for building social communities. Those are the 4 major areas of establishment in digital rhetoric. So like I said, we've talked about these things already, and it's sort of like all of these things have culminated into this lecture today, where finally we talked about the types of strategies itself. So all of this knowledge that you have accumulated over this semester, what are we going to do with this? You're going to do a presentation, right? So this will take the form of a project. I have one more lecture to give you next week, which is going to be, like I said, about how to pitch an idea and about organizing your presentation. And then next week, I will give you the file with all the criteria for what you're supposed to do. And I would like you to make a video between 8 and 10 minutes long. Like I said, we did the TED presentations earlier this semester. I'm not expecting a TED presentation. What I'm expecting you to do is put together a 10-minute presentation. It can be just you talking like this, explaining, promoting, selling, teaching, informing an idea or a proposal, making a proposal. That can be the content of it. But you're welcome to, rather than just do what I'm doing, you can put up graphics, you can put up slides, you can put your voice over top of things. You may have better skills than I do, and more time. You definitely have more time than I do, I'm sure of it. So if you want to, put some slides up and do some video editing and improve the flow and put title pages on and transitions between everything rather than just beginning to end speech like I'm doing, that it would be great. The more multifaceted it is, the better. So you may have noticed that the videos on my YouTube channel, for a while there were thumbnail title pages, and then I started to get behind and just I kept uploading things. This is so time consuming to do 10 lectures a week that I haven't been able to do all the things I want to do. But I would like you to show me how it's done, okay? I would like you to put together all the things that we've learned this semester and sort of integrate them into this project, and then produce a solid 8 or 10 minutes of focused on a certain topic. Okay, so this is going beyond this lecture, and I'm going to type this up, and we're going to have a Zoom meeting so we can discuss the details, and we will do some correspondence about exactly what you're going to present on, because there's a lot of different options. One idea might be for you to, if you're into certain things, like you're into computers, for example, and you think you have a good idea for an app, and you actually have some computer skills, and you've been learning programming languages in your free time, or anything like that. Maybe your major isn't, some of you are not in Asia business, maybe you're into something related to science. Or maybe you're interested in spreading something about the environment. You want to inform people about, climate change. These are all possible options for you. I want it to be, a senior level topic, though. It can't be how you think, dogs are better companions than cats or something like that. So we're going to have to go through a process of approval for you to choose your topic, but there is a wide range of possibilities for you to choose what topic that matches your own interests, and hopefully this will give you some experience, both in dealing with the computer software, presenting, practicing, speaking English, all of the skills that global business communication requires. Hopefully, most of those things will come together, and you'll be able to put together something that you can be proud of, and that I can give you a good grade for. So, the criteria, how it's going to be, how it's going to be set up, and how you're going to be evaluated, and what your topic's going to be, all of that information will be dealt with next week. And plus, there is a lot of sort of technical information beyond just the simple single words and phrases that I throw up on this small board. So I haven't been putting lecture summaries up for you, but I'm going to post tomorrow night. I'm going to post sort of a lecture breakdown of the digital identity stuff in particular. So all that information is going to be on the website. I apologize for being a day late, but not a dollar short, hopefully. And I look forward to talking to you next week. Like I said, pitch an idea is the topic for next week, and then the following week, it's the plan for us to get together and have a Zoom meeting. I'll confirm that with you early this week so that everybody can make arrangements. I think everybody's in Korea now, which is good, so be careful and stay safe. Thank you for listening, and have a good night.